I just thought that I would share it in passing. Now we have with us Professor Ashok Mohapatra, a very old senior friend of mine from Sambalpur University, who is going to speak on Bandhu Mahanty, Hunger and the Sacred. Before we begin, I'll just quickly introduce him to all of you so that you get to know a little about him. Professor Mohapatra is a professor of English at Sambalpur University. He was a Fulbright Research Scholar Fellow at Columbia University and Yale University. He has been UGC Visiting Fellow at the Advanced Center of English Studies, Jadavpur University, University of Delhi, and the University of Badwari. Dr. Mohapatra has published 3 books, including one on an anthology of criticism on American novels edited by him for Macmillan India in 2020. He has over 60 papers in national and international journals. So I will not stand between you and Professor Mohapatra. So over to Professor Mohapatra for his.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm audible. Anybody, if any problem you have with regard to hearing, please let me know. Am I clearly audible? Can anybody not listen or hear me? Is it okay? Am I audible? Okay. I'll be talking on Bandhu Mahanty, Hunger and the Sacred. I will begin with some preliminary reference to Bandhu Mahanty, well-known devotee of Jagannatha who lived in the 16th century during the reign of Prataparudra Deva. He appeared as a major figure in the Bhakti cult in the first volume of the hagiographic narrative Dadhyata Bhakti, written by Ramadasa, a Ramanandi saint poet who lived long enough through the reigns of Birakeshari Deva, Dibyasingha Deva, and Mukunda Deva. The first volume of Dadhyata Bhakti was completed in 1768 during the reign of Birakeshari Deva, while the second volume came out in 1800 during the reign of Mukunda Deva II. And Bandhu Mahanty narrative features as Bandhu Mahanty Sambada in the first volume. So much for the preliminaries. As a devotee of Jagannatha, Bandhu Mahanty, like Raghu Arakhita, Ananta Sabara, Balarama Dasa, among many others, has been part of Jagannath lore, and his relationship with his Lord is a newer figuration of the archetypal relationship between Krishna and Sudama, or Krishna or Akrura. According to a source, Madhala Panji recorded his story in 1818 and gave Bandhu Mahanty a canonical status. He has had a robust and vibrant afterlife in terms of his reappearance as a protagonist in Ashwini Kumar Ghosh's eponymous play premiered at Annapurna Theatre at Cuttack in 1944, and in 1977 also a film was made out of his life. I will not talk about the play or the filmic version. I will only concentrate on Dadhyata Bhakti to understand the linkages, particularly between hunger and the sacred, through the mediation of friendship. Friendship is very important. Okay, it's not easy, it's not difficult, I mean, to see a connection between hunger of the soul and spirituality in all major traditions of faith like Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Islam, or Christianity. And the spiritual anorexia or fasting is practiced as part of asceticism for either afflicting the flesh in order to cleanse the soul and deny pleasures of the appetite in the most comprehensive sense. I'm not interested in the metaphysics of hunger and the sacred, since Dadhyata Bhakti is not about all these. the text becomes interesting by positing a certain kind of divine human friendship at the center of an ethical schema where the corporeality of hunger can engender the sacral and affective power of, of, of bhakti, its piety, which we might gloss. Bhakti is very complex in its semantics, but we might gloss it as a filiative ardor, a warm eagerness for a friend, uh, and who will bring succor, relief to one's hunger and poverty and general distress, because he is inordinate in he has a supra-human capacity for it. But once again, to me, this suggests no easy tellus for such a possibility. Human divine philia or friendship or human divine love is extremely fraught in all cultures, whether Greco-Roman, Judaic, Christian, or Hindu. And the tension-ridden relationship played out variously in the Vaishnavite strand of Hindu faith is inherent in Bhakti. And if we are persuaded to believe that Bhakti embodies the highest and purest form of friendship, we would also do well to understand the complexities of not only the aesthetics, but also the ethics of this friendship, and above all, its distinctiveness, by recalling Derrida's politics of friendship. Derrida invokes the Aristotelian aporia as a pure friendship that is inaccessible and impossible. One of the many categories of friendship that he speaks of, his remarks on the impossibility of friendship with God are extremely relevant to the paper. There is no, I quote, there is no longer any possibility of friendship with God by virtue of his separation, but also because of the absence of a common measure for proportional equality between God and myself. So one cannot want God for a friend. Then the second reason is that friendship commands me to love the other as he is, by desiring that he remain and he is and do according to his nature as a man. Friendship is again in its origin and its end in the first sense. Its full realization is what is proper to man. So one cannot want to defy a friend. And yet, the third and doubtless most radical reason, the man of friendship as a man of virtue ought to resemble God. Now, God has no need of friends, so he thinks of himself and not anything else. Now, grounded in the Western tradition of political ethics and democracy, Derrida is searching for a kind of politics that is predicated upon equality. And in this schema, therefore, the idea of equality, already impossible as illustrated in the famous Aristotelian aphorism, which he quotes throughout the essay, "Oh, my friends, there is no friend," this gets negated by God. Hence, I would say that Derrida's rationalist analysis works out a new kind of deference with respect to the politics of friendship in the Bhakti paradigm. Speaking very shortly, deference, which means both difference and deferral of a friendship vis-a-vis Bhakti, would be that I have three propositions countering Derrida. One can want God for a friend. Two, one can want to defy a friend. And three, God has indeed the need of friends. And above all, a politics for this friendship, although not democratic in the Western sense, but Still, a very humane theocracy and ethically very efficient in a power structure of the state is still possible. If politics is possible in that sense. And this is because the state, under the rule of a king, is an earthly and temporal extension of the temple where God is the ruler. But interestingly, this kind of dispensation is born out of a contract and collaboration between the secular power and the divine power. While legends have it that Kapilendra Deva was consecrated as the king by Lord Jagannatha himself, and Purushottama Deva's Kanchi Kaveri second expeditions met with success as Jagannatha and Balabhadra came to his aid as his commanders. uh, it has been recorded by medieval history of the Jagannath temple that the Raja has protected the deity from marauders and vandals, and Madala Panji mentions the Afghan general Kalapahar's pillars of the temple, and the restitution of the wooden idols of Puri by Ramachandra Deva. As Kedarnath Mahapatra records in his Khurda Itihasa, this restorative mission on the part of Raja Ramachandra Deva was also embedded in the larger political acts of the reinforcement of the military part of the state by way of building a fort near Khurda, and even helping his contemporary Chauhan ruler of Sambalpur build up defense against Muslim onslaughts. So the political projects of reinforcement of the state that went ahead in hand with the restitution of the Lord, and the consolidation of Jagannath cult that had already been created by the Eastern Ganga king Anantavarman Chodaganga, who had built the temple. What I'm trying to say here is that the collaboration between power and faith, as mentioned in the context of the politics and institutionalized religious practice, was possible because of a tripartite transaction between God and king and the ordinary God believing subject of the state, in a curious kind of politics of friendship that was inflected with the affective power of Bhakti. When the state was in the grips of famine or any natural calamity, it is God to whom people turned, not to the Raja, who had been defined only as a servitor and a commander of God. And this was the most ideal solution of politics that, to my mind, it ended with the fall of the first line of Gajapati kings. In fact, it continued until the end of the rule of Prataparudra Deva. And his reign assumes significance because it was Chaitanya who arrived in Odisha. Whether the arrival of Chaitanya is 1510 or 12 or 16, there is a lot of controversy. What is important is that Prataparudra was converted to the non-dualist philosophy of Vaishnavism by Chaitanya, and one historian says something very interesting, that it was only after the loss of his kingdom in the south and death of his sons towards the end of 1516 that he realized the transitory nature of prowess and of family ties, and developed ascetic attitude towards worldly power and glory. And this precarious nature of the king's power was felt during the aggression of the Turco, Afghan, and Mughal powers, and Chaitanya's influence were was also a very overwhelming reason for Bhakti to grow, and the only impulse against all odds for seeking consolation and transcendence through the ministrations of a higher power. Just a minute. Yeah. So that's what it was. Now, the politics of friendship in a beleaguered state now chose Bhakti that could mediate between God and the weakened king on the one hand, and God and the poor laity on the other. Bhakti as a warm gush of ardor for a friend and lover, intense pleadings and entreaties for some help, protection and relief, and an earnest desire to surrender one's ego to the self-same friend or lover who is infinitely powerful, adopt an attitude of renunciation and seek transcendence. You know, when we come to mid 18th century, we notice that the political power of Deva had diminished considerably. He felt terribly insecure and adopted the policy of bribing, powers mightier than those that sought to topple him. He sided with the Marathas for self-protection against the Mughal onslaughts and incursion of Jagannatha Narayana Deva, the ruler of Paralakhemandi, who claimed himself a Gajapati, and he wanted to claim the you know title of Puri Raja. So he feared for the safety of the temple and priests and devotees, and but felt helpless as he could not pay the bribes that the Marathas demanded. And this led to his ceding to them vast tracts of arable lands and farmlands, as well as the power of taxation of as many as 14 feudatory states or Garjat Mahals. So the state of Khurda became weaker and poorer, and the king was distraught. Well, losing balance of mind, he even killed his own sons, and four of them. Uh, okay, so the king was obviously, this was the darkest moment for the state of the Lord, and this was indeed the moment to bring forth the politics of bhakti friendship and invest in it, daryata or farness. And therefore, the first volume of this Daryata Bhakti appeared on the Bhakti literary scene in 1768. And Bandhu Mahanty assumed a figural immanence as a devotee friend or bhakta to revive the politics of friendship that could articulate one's need for God as a friend, deify a friend, and also conceive of God in filiative terms as someone who needs a devotee, friend, or a bhakta. I'm aware of the time limits. I'll take maximum 5 to 6 minutes. Yeah. And what happens is that this mm, uh, the genre of the hagiography, with its admixture of factual and fantastic, of a real and imagined, offered a model of contriving a chronotope most suitable for the apotheosization of the politics of friendship and idealization of Bandhu Mahanty, the friend, for the firmness of his bhakti, praises for the king, Prataparudra for his solicitude towards the poor man, and the authority of Jagannatha, the king of kings, over Prataparudra to relieve the distress of the distress of his hunger. This leads to the tripartite power structure, uh, which remains intact, with God appearing before Bandhu Mahanty and disappearing soon enough, and also visiting the king in a dream. The tropes of God's disguise and visitations in dream in Bandhu Mahanti Samvada, as in many other narratives, are all too common. And what do they sustain? What they sustain is the elusiveness as well as the uh, power of God. Therefore, although a politics of friendship is possible, God, and in our context, Jagannatha or Krishna, maintains his power through distancing by being elusive, slippery, impersonal, and untied to human space and time. And for its part, Bhakti Bandhu Mahanti is sustained as the soul hunger, even as the physical hunger is sated, and he has been amply provided for at the end. Um, well, although what I'm not interested, as I have made it very clear. I do understand that there is a metaphysical component in Jagannatha philosophy, that the Jivatma is covered with five seeds, and therefore the uh, journey of the soul, perhaps, well, I mean, this Bandhu Mahanty narrative with his reunion with a friend can be allegorized in terms of the journey of the Jivatma from, from the Annamaya Kosa to Pranamaya Kosa. So this Annamaya Kosa is just the beginning, which is all about hunger and food, to Pranamaya Kosa, to Manomaya Kosa, to Vijnanamaya Kosa, to Anandamaya Kosa. That's the ultimate, which we find in Upanishads. I'm not interested in that. My purpose is not to philosophize hunger as an allegorical trope, but a distressful condition of corporeal existence that is documented as feminine in both history and literature. And Bandhu Mahanty Sambada is, it obviously has it for its setting, the time of famine, and that's very important. Although sporadic but very frequent in its occurrence, crop failure, drought, famine in Odisha were not just a reality in the pre-colonial and colonial times, but a very discursive presence throughout this period. The Madala Panji has many references to the famine's outbreak. I won't go into the details, but I will conclude by merely looking at another text, that is the Lakshmi Purana. But before that, I would just like to make one vital point. One may well observe the dynamics of the gastronomic opulence of the god and the poverty of the devotee. The Chausati, Poti, Chappan, Bhoga, all these, as you know, are part of the Jagannath lore. Uh, on the one hand, and Nirmalya and Tonkatorani, dried rice or fermented tangy rice water, on the other hand, are interplayed in the devotional songs and hymns to glorify the wealth and luxury of Jagannatha and lament privation of the devotee in the same breath. So the sentiments of ecstatic rejoicing and tearful lamentation resonate through the articulation of bhakti, because the gastronomic God himself understands the pangs of hunger in a highly popular bhakti text, that is Lakshmi Purana, and he has been cursed by Lakshmi. Thus, well, the story is very long. I won't go into that. But once he has been cursed, and Lakshmi goes away from the temple, well, he says well, to his brother Balarama, as to what he will be doing. But Lakshmi curses him this way: "Oh, I curse you, oh, listen, kind-hearted God. If the sun and moon traverse the sky for sure, no grain will of food will come your way. Poor you will remain for long 12 years, and in dire need of food, clothes, and water." The both brothers move about in hunger and distraught. Balarama look and idea about customs and mores, who on earth should care when life would lay the body as a draught of air. Toward the lotus filled pond, let's proceed to eat the lotus stalk and whatever else edible, and in these hard, improvident times, some such stuff as we should lay by. Okay, having felt the pangs of hunger, Jagannatha, Balabhadra both realized Lakshmi's power of plenitude and prosperity and sacralized Sriya's Lakshmi Bhakti. Incidentally, Balarama Dasa, one of the Panchasakhas of the 16th century, was also a figure in Dadhyata Bhakti, who writes another Bhakti narrative where the Lord has been reduced to privation. So if we take Bandhu Mahanty Sambada and Lakshmi Purana together, we will have a dense discursive way in which corporeality, hunger, and sacredness of bhakti have been interwoven, and a politics of friendship between God and laity has been possible. And the laity needs his God as a friend for fulfilling his creaturely and spiritual needs, as much as the God himself needs his laity in order to be immanent and, well, in benevolent power and glory in a model of filiative ethics. But God must remain distant at the same time in order to stoke the passion of bhakti in the devotee's heart and soul and keep it alive. So, a purpose of bhakti, I will only conclude by saying that it has many dimensions and inflections that can be profoundly metaphysical and very engagingly social as well. It can be articulated in erotic and filial registers. In filial terms, the Jagannath cultural tradition, it can accommodate both hunger and sacred as two sides of the same coin. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I overstepped the limits. I took a little more time than I should have, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mahapatra. It was indeed very fascinating to look at a different aspect of Bhakti, which is generally not highlighted within the framework of the 16th, 17th century work. Although Lakshmi Puran is highlighted for all the other and different reasons. One of the interesting things that you have definitely pointed to is the distance that is maintained between God and humans. In both the cases, you see that it's always that the acts take either there is an act of substitution, somebody else takes the place, and when one is aware of the fact that the Lord, the God is visited, by that point of time, they have vanished. So, realization of this act, realization of the fact that this is God is something which is always deferred. So, it's a very interesting thing, probably also related to the points you made about Derrida. But I'm sure that what is fascinating today is the fact that you are talking about a different flavor of bhakti than the ones we are generally familiar with. And the other one, which probably also needs to be mentioned, is what is known as the Jnana Misrita Bhakti, in which sense probably the Odishan Bhakti tradition is fairly distinctive from some of the other traditions. So probably that's all from my side as comments to this very, very exciting and insightful talk that you gave us. Over to Preeti ji for other comments and observations, and we look forward to questions in either in the chat box otherwise so that we can share them with.
Thank you, Professor Mahapatra, for this absolutely fascinating paper. I hadn't thought about how Derrida's politics of friendship could work with Bhakti, but it seems so obvious now that you've laid it out. So that's always a sign of truly amazing work. When you were mentioning famine and the king and God and kind of that kind of hunger, the collective hunger of famine, and how worship works there, I was wondering whether, apart from friendship, what is coming into play here is some idea of responsibility, and whether there is, because in Bhakti, one of the kind of common tropes is Atiti Satkar, a hungry, often destitute Atiti landing up at your door, and you kind of feeding them as an act of worship, as an act of piety, if not worship. So how does the idea of responsibility play in, particularly when responsibility is quite an important part of the structure of friendship as well, even for Derrida himself? So is there something going on there that you can build upon? That would be interesting to know.
Yeah, as far as this particular text is concerned, or certain other texts, there the friend is already considered of as being capable of extending help. The friend himself is not under any pressure. I mean, the friend is not at the death's end to make things available to the one who has come to his own doorstep. It's not like, I know what you are referring to. You have in mind Levinas.
Yes,
And,
yes,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I could see that, yes. But that's not what it is. I mean, it's not, the friend is not under pressure. The friend seems to be immensely resourceful. Bade Dilwala, he is God after all. So God, when you posit friendship on God, you do have lots of expectations on Him, and it's God who does who operates through the mediation of the King. That's the whole thing. But what you say could make the narrative even more interesting. What if the friend is not in a position to
Yes.
take care of the guest? Derrida himself has talked about the guest. Who can be a guest, can how to look after a guest. When, come to think of Moses, for instance, taking out the Israelites, and Moses obviously was someone on whom all the Israelites projected a lot of hope, but Moses was completely at a loss as to how he's going to keep them alive while they were making this hazardous
Yeah.
journey. And he felt as if he was a mother ready to give his breast's milk. This is something very interesting which nobody probably talks about. Moses assuming the mother's role. And these are interesting things. But certainly, yes, that's a very interesting point that you make. But as far as this schema is concerned, it's a lot more simpler than you think.
Uh, Professor Mahapatra, just one observation, very distinctly different from the Western narratives that the Western discourse we are talking about. We also have the story of Krishna Sudama,
Yes.
which probably could be getting echoed here. That's one of the things that we would love to hear you comment on.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention in passing Krishna and Sudama, and also Krishna and Akrura is another. Well, but Sudama, as we know, actually, the poor friend and rich king, and that kind of narrative where Sudama does have, expectations, but Sudama is so very shy. It is not nice to approach even your most intimate friend when you have fallen, even when you have fallen in hard times. And Sudama struggles with himself when he goes, and Sudama, of course, will be carrying some gift once again. What kind of gift does he carry? He won't go to his friend empty-handed, so he carries some dried rice, as the legends go, as the stories go. And yes, indeed, I mean, that is what I said. I mean, this kind of a narrative is only a more recent figuration of the archetypal Krishna and Sudama narrative. So apart from Krishna and Gopi as a kind of an archetypal pattern of erotic bhakti, we have a filiative bhakti of Krishna and Sudama, or Krishna and Akrura, for instance. That's very interesting. Akrura towards the end of the Mahabharata, asking Krishna to take him to heaven. And what advice does Krishna give to his friend? So what I wanted to talk about in this paper is that it can have an erotic dimension and a filiative dimension. By choosing this, Daryata Bhakti, this particular narrative, well, obviously the focus is on the filiative dimension of friendship. Can Bhakti be possible within friendship? Which obviously is, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Professor Mahapatra, there were two quick observations, not questions really. We find that such stories are getting frequently repeated. Even if you're looking at Jagannath as Krishna, here also something And we also have the story of Saki Gopinath, where
Hmm.
again the Lord is coming to the rescue of the disciples. So we have this
Indeed.
kind of a repetition of these stories again and again, which is fascinating. And the other point is that
I would like, because I'm interested in cultural studies, you would find at the back of many cars, Hare Ka Sahara Baba, Baba Baba Radhe Shyam, Hare Ka Sahara. He is an Hara. If you are defeated, he's there to help you out. This is a
yes,
very popular version. It's a popular version of a friend in need is a friend indeed, and that actually gets into the Bhakti register as well. So we have lots of interesting inflections in popular culture, as you have very rightly pointed out. There are many narratives to bring out different dimensions and different emotional contours of the basic relationship between the master and and the servant, who can still be friends, and which is simply inconceivable in the Western paradigm.
thank you. That's the most insightful take home that we have. Just one last observation which I have to make is that you find that in all these cases, it's only at a point when the devotee is asking for the Lord's help that the Lord helps. Even then, with a certain amount of delay. Now, it could be
Yeah,
for within quote cinematic effects, but we
right.
don't have examples of the devotee not asking and being given, or do we?
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Very, 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 very apt an observation indeed. Thank you very much, Priyadarshi. Yeah.